going through how I'm going to write pseudocode for task 3, designing the solution in the employee set project, as you can see here. And I've got a couple of windows open here, which probably just go to that one, and then I'm going to, basically what we're going to look at is, so I'm going to attach below a link to the solution that I'm going to go through with you, which is from the 2022 paper, which is autumn 2022. They give you, and I'll put this, they give you this data about an airline, and they give you this scenario. And the task is all the way in on page 5. And it's a very short paragraph. And from that, they expect you to know what to do. Basically, the information is, the data is from an airline. And if you look at it, and they've got certain routes, like from Dublin to London Heathrow, from Dublin to Luton, from Glasgow to London Heathrow. And they've got certain days on which those flights flew. And they've got a number of passengers who travelled like on that route on that day. So for example, here, there are 4 separate flights. They haven't identified them as 4 separate flights, but they're different flights that have all flown on that day. So the total number of passengers is that. And what they're asking you to do in this task 3 is to take this this data file and then read it in using pandas as a data frame, and then basically create a solution that will allow users to select a flight route, so from Dublin to London Heathrow, for example, and show the trends for passengers over time. So one thing, let's just think about this, what you need to do practically. Well, first of all, we need to be able to select the route from Dublin to London Heathrow. How are we going to go about doing that? Well, we need to ask them for where they're going from, where they're going to. And then we're going to need to find out what dates or range of dates they want to find out. So it might be from this date, a start date to an end date here. Or we might say, how many days do you want? And then just take like the last number of days. So say we want 10 days from the end, and then we'll be able to select using Pandas data frame the last 10 columns. You don't need to know how to write the Pandas code yet. You do need to do that for task 4A, but we'll come on to that when we come on to it. All you need to do is understand the steps. So the best thing to do is to write your solution in Word. So I'm going to call it task 3 airport pseudocode solution. Right, I'm going to write it in Word. Why am I going to write it in Word? Because I'm going to need to export this as a PDF, and also if you write it in a text document like in here or something, you will it's not very good at saving the formatting, as I've discovered. Right, so the first thing I want to do is think about what are, so I'm going to put the task data there and this here. So I'm going to think, I just want to write out in English, what is it that I want to achieve? So I want to read in the CSV file somehow and store that in a data frame. So we're going to use this pandas library. Now, here's a bit of code. This is how you would import pandas in Python, but you don't need to write the code for this. If you're really, really good at coding and you find writing pseudocode can be even more complicated because you have to think in this different language, it might be easier if you just think, if you know what you're doing, to write out the code to read in a data frame and then filter the information. That is what I chose to do, but only if you're really good at coding, and it's not part of the solution if you're not. So let's open up that again. So what is it? I want to read in the data frame of airline info. Then I need to I need to ask the user for a departure airport. Ask. I need to ask the user for a destination airport. Okay. And then maybe we want to ask them for a start date and end date to select a range of dates. So we're going to, these are the inputs. When you're like, so I'm going to link this. This is the whole solution here that I put on my Medium blog, where I've got the task that I'm actually talking through now. I've also got the mark scheme and the mark scheme and the examiner's report about what they're looking for as a good answer. I wrote out rough pseudocode as well, which is a little bit like what we're doing here. And also written out some of the things that I'm thinking about that I need to decompose. So I've got to think about like what I'm trying to do, some basic steps, then what my inputs are. So this would be an input, this would be another input, and this would be another input. And this stage here would be like processing of data. So, you know, data loading. And then we want to do some filtering on this. So once I've got the airport start and end date, we look at the data. So I'm going to say that I want to go from Dublin to Heathrow, and I want to go from this date to this date. I'm going to need to extract from this data frame that we've read in at stage one. I'm going to need to extract from that the dates that the information. So we need to do a filter. So we need to filter the from and to columns in the CSV file for the departure and the destination, right? So we're going to need to filter the from and the to columns in the CSV file for the departure and the destination. And store, I'm going to store that in a filtered variable. So we're going to get that information out. And then we're going to need to select a range of dates from the filtered, let's call it filtered flights, hey? We need to select a range of dates from the filtered flights, from the start to start date. So I'm trying to use my variable names to end date. Okay. And then we're gonna then store this in a filtered dates flights variable, right? And then we've got the data frame that we need. So we will have selected this this route, for example, for this range of days. So we will just get back that from this to that, right? We're going to be using something called in the code, it would be called df lock, where we're locating from this date to this date, that range of dates. But in the pseudocode, we just got to say what we're trying to do. And then we've got this data frame. And then the last thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to output or print filtered dates flights, right? So we need to output that, and then maybe we're going to draw a bar chart of that using like a barchart matplotlib library. And think about what you might want to draw on that bar chart. Sensibly, you'd want to draw on the x-axis these dates, and then we'd want to sum up the number of flights per day for that route. So so we need to add a step in here as well before we output it. We want to add up total passengers on from filtered data flights. Get a sum of that. We need to get a sum of that. And then we'd able to output that as a total, and it will show how many people flew from that to that date, how many passengers flew from this airport to this airport on each of these dates. And then we can draw a bar chart on which, on the x-axis, will just be those dates, and on the y-axis, we'll have like a total number of passengers. Just to visualize what I'm saying to you, let me show you some code, a solution that I wrote earlier. So we open the open recent. I'm going to go to here. So I'll just comment this out. So this is what the code this is what the code could look like. Although we're gonna put this into functions, I would not submit that. I would put that into functions. But if I just run that code, this is what it will happen. So you can see here in the code, we've got a variable for departure, a variable for destination, but we would ask the user for input here. Then we open up our data frame, which is that. So this would be these two steps where we're asking for the input. Then we read in the data frame, and then we're extracting from the departure to the destination. We're extracting a flight route, and we're storing that in this variable here, which would be that. And then I'm not in my code, I'm just hard coding some dates. So I'm filtering this is for 4A. This is actually a more advanced solution, but a different. This is actually for the one after that. So see if I can find a solution that I made previous to that, just for 3. This. I think it would be, well, it would be a little bit like this one anyway. So we're getting the information, and then we're filtering over a range of dates, and then we'd be displaying that in a bar chart. But as I said, you don't have to write the pseudocode for this. So I will come back to just doing the pseudocode, which is here. So I've written out the steps of all the things that I need to do in this solution. That's the first thing you should do. And then we need to translate this into like a pseudocode solution. So if you look at this article that I put in the link below, and you scroll all the way down to pseudocode 2 examples, you can actually see my whole pseudocode solution here for this specific question. I've broken that. What you need to do when you're writing pseudocode is use good variable names. Let me bring up I've got a guide, a pseudocode guide here that I will also link below. You've got to work out what your inputs and outputs are, like I was saying, the departure and destination. I've got to have variables and show which variables are storing what. use if statements, use loops to repeat actions, functions to break it up into procedures, or arrays to store multiple values, reading and writing files, which would be this one. And also, we want to make sure that we use the key thing is error checking. So if you look at my solution here, like if I ask someone to input an airport, then they've got to be able to input the right airport. So they should only be able to enter Dublin, Edinburgh, Glasgow, London Heathrow, Luton, Manchester, etc. for the departure from, and these ones for the to. So we've got to make sure that we're filtering for those airports. And we also need to check that they've actually entered in a string. They might have entered in a number. So we're going to need to error check things, which is what I'm doing a lot of here. And the other thing is we need to check whether the date is valid. Is it the right format, etc. And then finally, when we're doing the filtering, we need to have a function that's going to filter things, and finally have a function that's going to draw some bar charts. So let's see if we can just write a little bit of pseudocode that's probably going to be a little bit, hopefully, like my solution here. But you need to work out what the actual problem is that you're trying to solve. Okay, so I might have a main function like this. And in my main function, I'm going to have a variable. So if you look at my pseudocode guide, when you're defining a variable, one way you could define it is by using set and then the name of the variable and then say what you're setting it to. So I'm going to have df for data frame, and I'm going to set that to, and I'm going to create a function called load data. And that function I'm going to define here. So I'm going to write function load data. We might want to pass in the name of the file that we want to read in as well. So we could have file name like this, and the name of the file that we want to read in is the name of our CSV file, which is task3 data 2022.csv. So we're going to pass that in as a file name, and then we're going to have we're going to load this in. So that's the first thing that I'm doing here. So I'm going to and also what I'm doing here is I'm going to try and load it in and then catch an exception if there's an exception. So I'm going to try, and then I'm going to just, however you want to write this, but as long as it makes sense and someone understands what you're trying to do, that's the key thing. So we're going to load CSV file, and let's go, our variable is called file name. It's a bit confusing, isn't it? Maybe just make that capitals. And we're going to read that into a data frame called dm, right? If that's successful, we'll just return it. However, if there is an exception, so you could write except or exception, and what might that exception be? Might be that you've written the name wrong, so they can't find the file. File not found. Error. We want to give some output to the user. And as long as you're consistent how you do this, you could write print or output, just use the same names for the same pseudocode functions, but because we've got inputs and outputs, we will write output. What are we going to output? Error. file not found. Right. And then we're going to end the function. So that's our first function that's simply going to read in files. So the next thing we want to do is we want to get the we're going to get the departure. So we're going to have a variable called departure, and we're going to set that to get departure airport. And then we're going to create another function below it. It's really important to create lots of functions so that you can break up and modularize your code. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to say we're going to get an input. Oh, we're going to output to the user what they need to enter. Output. Enter departure airport. And then we're going to input whatever they write into a variable called departure. And then we're going to need to error check this, right? So what if they've entered a string? What if they've entered a number when we need this to be a string? What if they've entered something that's not valid? So what you might want to do is just eyeball through this, what the departure airports are. We could have an array, which I might define like the first thing, and I might call it set valid departures to, and then Dublin, Edinburgh, Glasgow, London Heathrow, Luton, and Manchester. And then we're going to check that this departure they put in. So we're going to use a while loop, right? So while departure is not in valid departures, we're going to keep asking them this question. Enter a departure. And then I want to maybe use an if statement as well. So if in the while loop, if that is not in there, then output a message to output. That is not a valid airport. We might also want to just check if departure is not empty, right? So whilst they've not put in an invalid response, something that doesn't exist in here, or departure is not empty, we're going to keep looping over it. And that's just a way of error checking to make sure that we're never going to try and filter on a data frame, on this data frame, with departures that don't exist here and destinations that don't exist either. So I'm going to finally, if everything is fine, we're going to return departure, right? So I can call up this function from my main bit of code. So we've got this like begin and end for the main begin main or whatever, and I'm gonna store that departure in there. I'm now going to write a similar function that's going to do the one for destination. So I'm going to get destination like that, and we're going to I'm going to copy this function and I'm going to paste it here. I'm going to just change the name of the function to get destination. And then let's just check what the valid destinations are. It's really important to break your code up into functions like this. You'll get extra marks for it. And it's just good code. Destinations. So what are valid? London, Heathrow, Luton, Manchester, Dublin, Edinburgh, Glasgow, all the same ones, right? One thing we are going to pass in is the departure airport, because another check we need to put in here, not only is that a valid destination, airport, but obviously the destination cannot be the same as the departure. And so we need to say it or it can obviously you can't go from Glasgow to Glasgow, for example. That's like an extra check in there. So you can see here already, I've written out the steps of what the problem is, how am I going to tackle this? And now I'm starting to think, right, so all of these points here could be separate functions. Reading in the CSV file, checking to see what the departure is and destination is, validating that. Now we're going to do the same for start and end date. And then we'll write a function for the filter, and then this selecting over a range of dates, and then we're going to summing them up, and then we're going to write a function to do some output graphing. So we've got departure and destination. Now we're going to get set start date to. I'm going to write a function called get start date. And all the way at the end of my pseudocode here, I'm going to have a function get started. End function. So what have I got to validate on this? So I'm going to switch to my pseudocode that I wrote earlier that you can have a look at, and you can immediately see the solution. So I'm going to ask them for inputs. I might just copy some of this over into here. I'm going to ask them for the inputs for the start date. I'm going to create two separate functions, I think. And then I'm going to validate while the date is not valid. And that obviously we can't have the start date being greater than the end date. So that's an extra validation we're going to put on. And I've got this extra function down here that we're going to pass the date into and see if the date matches a certain format. So we're looking for a date, day, month, month. So when we're asking them for the date, we must make sure that we ask them to input that into it as the right format. Okay, so I'm going to copy this over. That's good. I want to be consistent that I don't need that using output. So enter the start date in that format. And then I'm going to have the while loop to check if the things they've entered are valid. And you always need to start in pseudocode. Any like if must have an end if, while must have an end while, function must have an end function. Because there are no brackets, you want to make it clear where things start and finish, else someone might get confused and think that that piece of code is inside of another function. So you need to have these start and end things, right? While not valid date, going to ask him to put it in again. And then we need to do this validate to actually validate the date to see if it is right. So I'm going to copy this into here because it's a bit quicker and easier. But hopefully you're just following this and understanding it. You can see I've got if, end if, so it starts where it ends and finishes. But we need to write this function. We need to write this validate date function. So let's do that. Function valid date. I'm going to pass in the date. I'm going to say if the date matches the format. See, there is no specific language of pseudocode. It's just as long as someone can understand the logic. And I was just writing it out in a different way as I did it there. So if it matches that format, then it's valid. So we're going to return true. Else return false. And then we're going to end the if, and then we're going to end our function. And this is called not. This is called valid. So we're going to say if, call up this function with this date, we're going to check if it's valid or not. If it's not valid, print that error, else if it is. And then the last thing we need to do is actually return that start. Start date. And what I've actually done in this solution here, which you can see in the link below, is on my Medium blog, is I've actually got in the same function get date, and I'm returning them as a tuple. So I'm returning, you can actually return two things from a function, but I'm just being a bit more explicit here, and I'm gonna copy that and just create another function from get end date. Enter end date, store it in end date. Input it into there, and then we're going to validate that end date and get rid of that. Yeah, and I'm going to validate that and return the end date. So I've just copied the function, nothing wrong with that, as long as it's very clear. And then we're going to call up that get end date, and we're going to get the end date. So now we've got all the inputs. So if you look through my article here, that's the first thing you get. And my rough pseudocode and our solutions is we're reading in the data frame, which we didn't actually have to need to at the beginning, but we did. And then we're getting the inputs and departure, destination, start and end date. Getting the inputs. Now doing some now we need to do processing of the data and filtering. We've already got the data in, but now we need to do this filtering, where we're going to get the root from a 2 in the CSV file. Then we're going to get the range of dates, and then from that range of dates, we're then going to sum up the number of passengers on that, and then return that data frame so we can output it. So this is the last function that we've got. So let's get on with that. And I might do that here. So if you scroll, and this function is going to be called filter We could probably break this up into two functions. We could like filter the root with the data frame, end function, and then we could write another function called filter the dates and some passing in the we're going to store the root that's filtered in filtered root. So what else do we need to pass in when we're filtering the root? Not only the data frame, but we need to pass in the departure and the destination. And when we're filtering the dates, we need to pass in the filtered root and the start date and the end date. So how could you write pseudocode for doing data pandas filtering? You don't have to get it exactly as it would be in Python. This is an example of writing filters in Python somewhere. So for example, this is the actual code to filter on a certain root. We'd say you'd use the df lock, so the data frame. You're locating where the column, where the departure in the from column is equal to whatever departure is. Could be Dublin, London, Heathrow, and the destination is in the to column in the data frame are equal to that destination. So that's how you would actually write. And if you look at the answers from the mark scheme, they actually write it very similarly to this. But I think that you can get away with, as long as you show what variables you're going to store the result of that in and what variables you're going to be filtering on, you could kind of get away with writing maybe an Englishy type sentence, as long as they understand the logic of what you're doing. Because if you look at the mark scheme, for example, they're looking at how you decompose the problem. They're looking at how you apply logical thinking and communication and design. So as long as you show that the logic is there and people understand what you're trying to solve, then it's okay. And if you look at the model answers as well, they're actually writing almost Python code to do those filters. But I think that you could probably get away with writing, if you're not 100% sure and you can't remember it, because you still need more experience with actually just writing it out. So let's do that. Right, so we're going to filter the root. So we're going to create a variable called filtered root. And we're going to filter that. And that's going to be equal to the data frame. I'm going to write it. I'm just going to say, okay, where the from column in the data frame equals departure and the to column in the data frame equals destination. And that is going to do this filter. You could write it out like that if you want. It's very clear to anyone that that's correct. but this also explains it and does it. It's clear to me what you're trying to do there as well. So then we get that filtered data. And maybe we want to try and, like, what if somehow they've entered in a department, what if that flight route doesn't exist? We might want to, like, maybe just put a try catch block around that. It's always good to do error checking or try accept, and then output perhaps the route does not exist somehow. Maybe there is a route between Glasgow and Dublin, and in fact there is, and you want to try and catch that. So that's filtering for the route. So then in our main function, we're going to do, we're going to have a filtered route, and I'm going to set that to filter route, and we're going to pass in the data frame, the departure, and the destination. So the next thing we want to do is get filtered dates. We're going to select a range of dates, and then we're going to sum it. And to do that, we're going to call our function filter dates and sum. I'm going to copy that there, and then we'll paste it in there. And we're going to pass in the filtered route and the start date and the end date. So what are we going to do in here? So we need to set filtered dates to, and we're going to filter this route thing. We're going to filtered route, where the columns between start date and, maybe use capitals for keywords if you can, and end date, where the column between that start, and then we're going to get those filtered dates. And because this function is also going to do a sum, now we're going to do summed filtered dates, and we're going to say that for those column ranges, add, you could write dot sum, and we're going to add up, or like sum up the columns in to get total. We're going to sum up columns in filter data to get the total passengers. And then they're going to finally return that data frame. Let me just show you. I'm going to write the code. I'm going to see if I can just write the code live to show you what that would actually look like. There we go. So I'm reading in the data frame. Then I'm going to do, I'm not going to write out the functions. Filtered date, filtered route, and I'm going to say df lock, and then I'm going to go, like Dublin, df from equals Dublin, and df to equals London Heathrow. Might be something. I think we've got to put some brackets around it. Yeah. So that's going to filter the root, and I'm just hard coding in. I could have asked for input, I could have like input whatever, but I'm not going to do that. And then that on that filtered root, we're then going to filter dates, and then we're going to say we're going to locate over a range of dates. So we want all the rows, because the rows is first, and then we want the columns from this one. Let's say we'll just do that date, and then we're going to go to that date. So range, and if because it's a range, I'm going to put in that, and then that should go in square brackets. Sometimes the syntax is really fiddly, but you don't have to write out the syntax in your actual exam. You just got to write out the code. Damn it. Let's just look at an example that I made earlier, which is at the bottom of this article. I actually put all the code. See how you need to remind yourself. Open up that. Oh yes, it's lock, colon, and then we don't need, okay, so just brackets around the whole thing. Square brackets around the whole thing like that. Okay, so now on that filtered root, we're now filtering over these dates. And let's see what that data frame looks like. And if I run this on Python, task 3, we have a key error. And this is why we do this try catch. It just crashed. But if we'd done a try except block, and then printed the exception, we may have got more detailed. There's information, but I can tell you what the error is because the column is from, and we've used capitals, so it should just be from, and it should be to. If there is an issue with the date as well, that would have thrown up an error. If I run that again, and then I'm going to print that in there. Didn't know about that because it's not scope. And we filter on that over the that is correct. That's filtering for a root. And then this is filtering that thing over a range of dates. So this should work. Unless I need brackets around these. Don't see why. I'll come back to this in a second. But that would basically be how you could write the code in a few lines without nice functions and error checking, which isn't what we want. What is the difference between that one and that one? Of the gaps. Okay, maybe we don't need the square brackets there. So we've got just square brackets around the whole thing. Sometimes the formatting is really tricky sometimes. There we go, and here's our data frame. So now basically what I've done here in a very quick way, I should use functions in this code. That is what this summed. Well, actually, we haven't summed that. If we then did a sum on that, right? We then get this data frame, which is exactly what that looks like. So this is what the sums the filtered dates looks like. Let's also just print out the filtered roots, so you can see that filtered root. So firstly, we've got loads of data for our filtered roots because we've got all the columns. We haven't selected a range of columns. Then we select a range of columns. So I could actually just print that out. Filtered dates. And then if we did a sum on that, we'll get the sum as well. So that's the roots over all the columns, 30 columns, but we only want it over this range of columns. So then we get to this, but then we want to sum it up. So we get to this, right? And that is what we finally got, which gets returned back into our main program here. And the final thing we can then do is output or visualize the data. So we're going to simply call the function called well, we're going to print it out. I'm going to output my data frame. That's the minimum you have to do. But better still, we want to draw a bar chart. I'm going to pass in the filtered summed dates. I'm going to draw the bar chart with that. What did I say I wanted the bar chart to do? I want to draw a bar chart of filtered dates. Let's think about what's going to be on our X and our Y axis. So I've visualized it here. I've already printed it out. But if just by looking at the this, well, if we've filtered this route and we've summed up all the flights over these dates, on our X-axis we're going to have the dates, and our Y-axis we're going to have the we're going to have the total number of passengers for this route to this route. So the title of the graph is going to be from departure to destination that, and then the x-axis is going to have these dates, and then we're going on the y-axis we're going to total sum of passengers. So let's make that a bit easier for me. Again, I'm just going to write that, draw a bar chart function with that. And I'm going to end function. Should be called a procedure because it's not going to return anything. These ones are functions, but this one's actually a procedure. So let's change that maybe. Procedure. Right. Now we're going to draw a bar chart with, we need to say what we're going to draw, a bar chart, a line chart, or whatever. Set x axis to x-axis label to date, set y-axis label to total passengers, and then set title to total number of passengers. So we're also going to pass in other information like departure and destination, so we can create a good title for it. Total number of passengers from, and we're going to concatenate a string, departure to destination. Okay. And so we're outputting that data frame, and now we're drawing the bar chart. To visualize what this looks like, I'm going to do matplotlib. I'm going to import pyplot plt. I'm going to then say, I'm going to store this in filtered sum, that, and then I'm going to say filtered sum dot plot. And then I think with matplotlib, you need to say the type of bar chart. Anyway, I'm going to have to look at my code. So sum and then plot. The kind of bar chart basically is this. I copy that to be quick. Right, instead of x-axis label, what do they say? Dates. Y-axis label, I said total passengers. Title is going to be which is from Dublin to, sorry, I was hard coded them. Now I can run this again, I get a bar chart too. So I can print it out the data frame. That's really important. You also want to visualize it in a sensible way to show the number of passengers over time. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a complete solution to the 2022 task 3, where they're giving you the airport information. They're giving you different airport routes, different passenger numbers over a certain number of dates. How do we firstly read in that data frame? Right. Well, firstly, we write out all the steps, things we want to do. So we need to read the question, make sure we understood that is basically that small little paragraph there that we've got to write. But when they say the solution must be easy to use, display information in a meaningful way, make use of appropriate textual graphical inputs, what they want you to do is to have good, like for example, when you're asking for routes, like here, enter a departure airport, maybe also just add in like from all the different airport options, and then they want you to be error checking it, so it's easy to use. So if something isn't right, that you give them feedback. Same for the destination, same for the dates. If they enter in a date that's not the correct format, or the date is like before the other one, for example, which we didn't put a check in for, but not a valid date, but also that the end date is not before the start date. But then this is the overall question that they're asking them to do. We want to allow them to input this bit of information and show the trends of those passengers over time. So once we've got those inputs, then we do our filtering stuff, where we filter the route. How we're going to filter it? You look at this thing, we're going to filter it from and to there, and then filter the dates from that date to this date. And then finally, we're going to draw a bar chart of this information. So I will put a link to a pseudocode guide, but also a link to my complete solution of this with this worked out solution here in the link below. And if you have any comments or questions, ask me in the comments below, and give us a like if you like this, and I'll make more of these if it's useful and helpful. And one more thing to say as well is, and I'll also link in these other task series, because it's really important that you go and do as many of these as you can, so when you get to the exam you know what you're doing. So for example, another one is from the May 2024 and the June 2023. So the May 2024 one, what they give you is if I go to here, that one, so they give you a different bit of information. They give you this. Basically, it's a like a, I think it's a shop or something. What do they say is I can't remember what the actual scenario for this one is, but basically it's sales of different items in a shop, I think, over 4 weeks. So there's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Tuesday. So it's 4 weeks. And they just want to know how many tickets have been sold in total, how many gift shop items have been sold in total, that in total, that in total. But they also, so that might be one thing you could do. But they also want to know, perhaps over a certain range of over the 4 weeks, what were the total sales on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, right? So you need to group all these days together and add up the ticket that for whatever thing they want to get the data on, add up the total sales on the Mondays, on the Tuesdays. That's an easy way to do that with pandas. But the simplest, one of the simplest things you could do in this, and you could do multiple solutions, is firstly just to sum up the total number of sales for whatever item. So ask them to input an item and then sum that up. The more complicated one is then to group this column by days of the week and get a sum of that. So have a go at writing the pseudocode for that. Remember, when you're doing that, just write down all the steps of the things you're going to do. Read in Dataframe, get the inputs, do the filtering, do the output, and then start to get into writing the pseudocode where you're creating variables and you're doing the filtering and passing things back. Another one is the one, so that's from the 2024 one. Another one is from the 2023 one. Again, they give you very little bits of information, but go back into that. T levels. Summer 2023. That's the data. It's a restaurant. They give you a range of items for sale over a range of dates, and they want to know how many nachos have we sold over a certain range of dates or all of the dates. So you would have to ask the user for an input. What item do you want to find sales for? Ask them for a start date and end date, and then you'd need to sum up the row for that selected item, and then output that and put that into graph. So you can see that all of these tasks are the bit that really differs is the filtering bits. So you're going to have to do different filters. Are you summing up columns? Are you summing up rows? Are you having to group by a row to get the total sale? To get the total number of sales for that day of the week over that 4-week period. Are you going to group by, or are you going to sum up a row? And that all you have to do in the pseudocode is point out what you are wanting to do without actually necessarily needing to know exactly how to do it. So I'll also put these two scenarios with their data zipped up in the link below, so you can have a go at those and do those. And if you have any questions or you want me to make a video on that, let me know. Thank you very much.